Good evening and welcome to Book Passage. I'm Bill Petricelli, one of the owners of the store. I welcome you this evening. One of the reasons for all the seating adjustments here is that we're right in the middle of our Mystery Writers Conference, so we had priority seating for people who are attending the conference. And we had the rest of you we held up for a while, and everyone's got a seat. Hopefully everyone's happy, because it's really going to be an exciting program. Let me say one thing first, it's sort of a personal thing. I was up here last night with John and the squad doing something, and somebody asked me a question about, on my own book when I was on author tour, who helped me on my author tour, and I was kind of caught flat-footed, and I failed to mention a couple of faculty members, Mystery Conference faculty members who helped me. They were right here in the room, for God's sake. So let me just point out that one of the things that, as an author, I was very, very lucky. So when I went on tour, I had my friend David Corbett introduce me out of Lori King, who did a wonderful presentation with me down there. And Isabel Allende, I forgot to mention her. We had thank you one and all, and thanks to the rest of you for that. So now that I'm through with the mea culpas, let me get to the evening at hand. We're lucky tonight to have a really interesting in-conversation between two very good authors, both of whom have interesting backgrounds that some of you, one of you probably know from the news, and the other one you probably should get to know. Valerie Plame, former covert CIA operations officer. Most of you know this story, but it's really worth repeating. That she was, a very good intelligence officer who basically was sabotaged by our own government, rendered incapable of doing the job for which she was trained in a really scandalous political development. I guess it's 7 or 8 years ago now. But like all resourceful people, she went on to do the one thing that you can probably do in the whole world there is again, you become a writer. And she become a very good writer. She was here, a year or so ago for her book Fair Game, which talked about the process that she and her husband Joe Wilson went through when she was outed as a spy. And it was a wonderful book and a wonderful lead. Gavin Newsom was here in conversation with her. Those of you who are here probably, who were here for that event probably haven't forgotten it. Since then, she's been speaking out a lot on nuclear proliferation and talking about the role of women in intelligence. And she's written a novel, which she's going to talk about tonight, called Blowback, which has a character that's basically fighting to stop the world's worst nuclear proliferation person from carrying out his dastardly plans. It's a very exciting book and getting very good reviews. She just told me she has another second book on that same series coming out soon, probably in November. She's just reviewing the galleys this weekend, which is, for any author knows, that's when it gets really good, when it's down to you're reading the last copy of it. She'll be in conversation with Tim Maleeny. Tim Maleeny has written 4 excellent books. He's gotten a lot of awards for them. The first one was Stealing the Dragon. The latest one is called Jump, which is a good standalone mystery. And Tim got a review that any author would kill for. The Boston Globe said, listen to this. If you threw in the air the pages of Agatha Christie's Murder on the Orient Express and Elmore Leonard's Get Shorty, and then invited Monty Python to stitch them back together, you might end up with something like Jump. Tim, I don't know how you did that. But that is a wonderful review for a wonderful book. So come on up, Tim Maleeny.
Thank you. I'm going to bias a lot of the questions that I'm going to ask Valerie through the lens of Mystery Writers Conference. So those of you who are not part of this conference, bear with us, just to inform the writing and the teaching of writing while we're here. I'm going to jump back and forth between two excellent books from Valerie. The first is this amazing personal memoir of what she did in the CIA and what happened to her when she was outed by the government, called Fair Game. Or as I like to think of it, the excellent title from, wait a minute, I'm going to get this right, from chapter 10, The Only Washington Scandal Without Sex. Because your life story and this story clearly, dramatically informed this awesome thriller, Blowback. So I'm going to jump back and forth, if you're okay with that, and talk a bit about that. So you were a CIA operative, which pretty sure means you were a spy. So your job was to discover the truth. You were outed by people who made shit up, and now you're writing novels, and your job is to make shit up. What do you like better? How do you you know, it's would you rather be on the cover of this book or this book?
First of all, thank you to Bill. Thank you so much to Book Passage for having us here. This is really such a special place. I first was here last October when Blowback came out, and it's obviously so important to this part of the world, the community, and everything that you do. So thank you. Independent bookstores are really important to our community. So would I rather be a spy or a writer is the question?
Yeah, if you could, if that hadn't happened, would you'd probably still be doing that?
Yeah.
If I read that book
That's right.
correctly,
If none of that had happened, the leak of my name came in July 2003 in a column by conservative columnist Robert Novak, who's gone now.
Even though it's a Mr. Writers Conference, usually someone will say we don't necessarily want applause, but it's totally up to you. And I was going to ask if the CIA had anything to do with that, but I'll leave that question for
No. But when that happened, obviously the career for which I've been trained, I felt I derived a great sense of satisfaction. I'm doing what I did, which was essentially making sure bad guys do not get nuclear weapons. But obviously my career path was interrupted, and I didn't see a lot of promotions in my future. So it was done. In all seriousness, there were some very dark times, and we moved in 2007 out to New Mexico, where we are now, another beautiful part of the world. Not nearly as green as it is here, but that's when we worked to put together our professional lives and our personal lives. And then my publisher, who worked with me with Fair Game, said, what do you think about writing a spy thriller? And I'd really never given it thought, but of course you can write things in fiction that are true.
So one of the, if you haven't read this, you really must read it. It's riveting. But one of the things that's was just a fascinating decision that makes it even more mesmerizing is apparently when you work at the CIA, you have to sign something that says that anything you publish will be reviewed by the CIA, so they can redact anything. So if you are reading this book and you get to a point where, and then you turn the pages, you will see pages like this, where suddenly you want to know what the hell's underneath the black markings, and we really can't. And there's this, in this edition, there's this afterword that sort of talks about, because some of that, my understanding is some of the stuff that was taken out was in the public domain, but because you had been employee of the CIA, you can talk about that.
Let me explain a little bit, because that looks really bad. You're like, who wants to buy a book like that? But it's just it's a good visual there. So when you join the CIA, everyone is obligated to sign a secrecy agreement, and you agree not to reveal classified information. It's something I completely advocate and understand and adhere to. But what that means is going forward, anything that you publish must go through something called the Publication Review Board, PRB, to make sure that it doesn't contain classified information. So when I submitted the manuscript of my memoir, first of all, the agency has made the determination that I am not permitted to acknowledge publicly that I was affiliated with the CIA prior to 2002. You know, that thus making a memoir somewhat difficult, as you might imagine. It was really, honestly, it felt like a betrayal all over again in many ways. I had served my country loyally, I had served the agency loyally, I had done a good job. But it was, when this came out in 2007, it was still very hot politically. And it was very clear that there were forces at work to try to make sure that the book would not be published at all and that I would not benefit from it in any way. So my publisher at that time, David Rosenthal, who really has been a champion of mine from that time on, he said, well, all right, we're going to publish it with a redaction so the reader has a visceral sense of what the CIA took out. And I want to tell you that underneath those black lines, it has nothing to do with harming our national security. It has to do with the fact that I may have existed before 2002.
I found that hard to believe.
I'm crazy, huh? I just dropped from the sky. I was the senior manager of the CIA. And the other thing he did, this was when he was with Simon & Schuster, he worked, contacted with an investigative journalist, Laura Rosen, very good. She wrote this afterword that essentially fills in all the blanks. We had no communication whatsoever prior to the publication of the book, so that I could say, you know, she can do what she needs to do. There was an overabundance of information in the public domain, I think is fair to say. So she did her job, and they put it together, and that's how it happened.
I want to jump into Blowback. Before I do that, I want to ask you a personal question about fair game, which is, you could have just gone quietly into the night. This happened, your career comes to a abrupt stop, you're done, that's horrible, on with your life. You chose to take that on in a very public way. You end up testifying before Congress. There are all sorts of political and legal ramifications, right? It's a bonfire. And you're writing this book. And you have twins, who are now 14 and a half, right? So talk about that decision, because that was a very courageous move that must have been terrifying.
It was really done out of, it was a very selfish motive, and by that I mean I wrote the book as a catharsis, really, a personal one for me. I didn't think, you know, you think you'll remember all these things, but you don't. It was the whole debacle from when my name was leaked to when the Vice President Cheney's Chief of Staff, Scooter Libby, was convicted. That was 4 years. And it was sort of a rolling crisis, and it was one of those media events that waxed and waned in the public eye. And in order for me to make sense of, you know, what just happened, what were the things going on, I set to work writing it. And that's how I see it, as it was a way for me to process all that we had been through. When I look back, I mean, 2007, this actually came out in 2008, not that long ago. However, in social media terms and how we are so drawn into what's on the internet and all that is available, I am so grateful that all of this actually happened before that completely took off into a supernova, because it would have been that much worse in terms of the trolls that are out there. And I mean, for years, my husband and I were called traitors and liars and accused of everything, and that was hard enough reading about it in the Wall Street Journal, much less, I can imagine, in today's social media world would have been worse.
And your kids were much younger, but how did you handle that as this was happening? You know, you're suddenly in the public eye, the book's coming out, all of that. How were those conversations?
Well, it was clear when they were little, they thought that everyone's parents were on TV. Doesn't everyone have photographers on their front lawn? No, honey. You know, they were little, they were born in 2000, so they were really little when this happened. And we worked really hard to not isolate them, but insulate them, because this was not anything of their making. And I didn't even really want them to think about their parents, in strange ways. Who knows if they'll need therapy when they're older, but they seem relatively well adjusted. And again, moving from Washington to New Mexico, we were warmly welcomed in the community, but that's also helpful in pushing back a little bit. As a parent, your children's well-being is absolutely paramount. So I'm glad, we're just sort of beginning to exhale now.
So, say again the gap in time between this coming out, you going on that tour, you going through that catharsis, and this notion being broached with you, and you starting to sit down and say, okay, yeah, I'm ready to write a novel.
That was probably 2011 is when there was a film made of Fair Game with Sean Penn and Naomi Watts, which is a good movie. You can get it on Netflix. It speaks the essential truth of what happened. So that was 2010. So it must have been 2011 when this idea got going, and then it was just published last October, and the next one will be out this October.
So your protagonist, Vanessa, right? Very badass. Now, clearly, there's a lot of you in her. So talk a little bit about that as you were thinking through that character and how much of yourself you wanted to put on the page.
Yeah. Well, my personal irritation is how particularly female CIA officers are portrayed in popular culture. Whether it's movies or books, they're always pretty and they might be lethal, but they really are cardboard characters, aren't they? They're just paper dolls and really have very little to move the plot along. I wanted to write a character, along with my co-author, Sarah Levitt, who bought into this completely, of a much more realistic female ops officer who's challenged. You can imagine it is a strange career. How do you have any sort of personal life, really? But also deeply attracted to what that means, living and working overseas. In the first one, Blowback, we start off, the villain, if you will, is someone that we call Bhoot, which is Hindi for ghost. And he's inspired by A.Q. Khan, if you know who that is. He was a Pakistani nuclear entrepreneur, for lack of a better term. He sold nuclear widgets around the world to anyone who had the money, completely amoral, and helped supply. Iran would not be as far down the nuclear road now if it were not for A.Q. Khan. He also provided parts to Libya, North Korea, really a fascinating but amoral character. So that's who Vanessa Pierson is chasing, and it starts off with an assassination with her asset. She's with her asset, meeting her asset, and he is killed in a Vienna park. He has come out to tell her the location of a secret Iranian nuclear facility and is killed before her eyes, before he can tell her where it is located. And it's off from there.
Earlier today during the conference we were talking about how critical it is to open your books with a bang. This book literally opens with a bang, and it's an amazing first chapter. It's fantastic. So talk a bit more about that notion of wanting to get it right based on your experience, and beyond not wanting the two-dimensional cardboard cutout character, but other attention to detail things in here to give it that sense of realism as opposed to an over-the-top spy thriller.
I get asked a lot, what's your favorite CIA movie, or what's the most, there's a difference between favorite and most realistic, right? I mean, who doesn't like Bond? What's not to, or The Bourne Identity. They're all, very attractive entertainment. Yes, I enjoy Homeland. Claire Danes is great. But in terms of realism, none of them, I roll my eyes. I'm sure it's the same if there's any lawyers in here and you watch, or doctors, and you watch that on TV and how it's presented versus the reality. But I wanted to make it as realistic as possible. And in terms of how the typical cycle to recruit a foreign agent is spot, assess, develop, and recruit. What that looks like actually, what it looks like to communicate clandestinely with your asset, how you need to keep them secure. the challenges both inside CIA headquarters and those relationships. I mean, Vanessa is very ambitious, but she's also a young woman trying to figure out, how do I retain my femininity, have some sort of personal life, and still be effective at my job. And then all the bad guys, of course, outside, who find that she is really smart and persistent. And in many cases, as in so many places in the world, women are completely undervalued or not deemed worthy of taking a second look at, which is good if you're in the spy business, because then you can go about your business, you know, so you can go about doing what you need to do. How to put that on the page and make that come across so the reader, while it's still entertaining, you know, that's finding that balance.
Talk a bit about what was, as you moved into fiction, what were some of the challenges just about that in terms of, like, you know, obviously for the folks at the writing conference, you were working with Sarah, she's an experienced writer, but still you're trying to get the story out and figure out, you know, what's going to happen, what the hell's going to happen next. Talk a bit about that.
Well, prior to Fair Game, my writing experience consisted of relatively dry, factual, to-the-point intelligence reports. So it hadn't really prepared me. Fair Game, writing a memoir, is a whole different ball of wax, as my mother would say, compared to writing fiction. My publisher sort of hooked me up on this blind date with Sarah Lovett, who is an established thriller writer. As it turns out, she also lives in New Mexico, in Santa Fe, where we are. And we met and hit it off, and we complement each other well in that she really understands the craft of writing, of pacing, and how, you know, what needs, there's people who spend years and years and years honing that, and she has. What I bring to the table, of course, is my experience, the characters inspired based upon a lot of people I've met along the way, some crazy people, the places, and, you know, the driving plot. What is it? And for me personally, I'm passionate about the whole issue of nuclear proliferation, so of course that shows up in my book. And I can't think of it's at the top of the threats. After, you know, there's global warming, nuclear terrorism, pandemic.
There's a lack of coconut shrimp in the world. I'm personally
I know that's number 4.
So maybe I'm just number 4, but it's on the list. Talk about that process of writing with somebody. Are you outlining? Are you throwing stuff back and forth? Like, talk a bit about that, because there's some collaborators here, and just a little, like, where did you skin your knees? How was that experience?
Literally skin our knees. We plotted out the second book on a hike up a mountain, or, you know, a hill, but it was a good hike, and we were out of breath at some points, and in the course of maybe this 4-hour hike, we had blocked out. This is the second book, not the first one, but sort of, you know, the different acts of how we wanted to follow. And we go back and forth, even though we live in the same town, through the wonder of the internet. We don't see each other that often, but there is a great deal back and forth. We have just found what works for us. I wouldn't presume that it would work for anyone else.
I'm going to invite folks to start asking questions sooner rather than later. I'm keeping an eye on the clock, so as hands go up, I'll just divert our conversation to that, so feel free to start asking questions. So the second book is going to be called Burned, and that's coming out when?
That will come out in October. Unfortunately, I don't think I'm coming back here, but I have family in the area, so maybe I will.
We'll be here. We have
I'd love to come out.
You squandered that warm introduction.
for lack of trying.
So let me ask you a question about that. When you were writing Blowback, first novel, did you know, okay, I want to turn this into a series, and my publisher is asking me to do that? Did you have a sense of the trajectory on that?
Yes. This is how we sort of thought about it, but you never know where the journey is in the beginning. How would we get along with Sarah and I? What would it be well received? And it happily it was. And now I feel like I'm getting the hang of it. It's, oh, right, now I get it. And how, I feel like my learning curve has been very steep, but I bring more to it now. I know what I like, and I want it to be realistic but entertaining. It opens, I'll share this with you, it opens with a dirty bomb in the Louvre courtyard. But don't worry, No national treasures were harmed. Where's Kara? It's fine. Everything's fine. No Mona Lisa has been. And it takes off from there. And for me, one of the appeals, and I think for most people, of say the Bond movies, is the armchair travel, right? Who doesn't love to go to all those exotic places? And that's what we've done in this. All the places in Blowback and Burned are places I've lived or worked. So this goes from Paris, we go to, and it ends up in Istanbul, and Venice in between. And places that I know and I've worked operationally, and it brings back a lot of memories. And fortunately, of course, I still had to put this through the Publication Review Board of the CIA, but I get to say it's fiction.
I was going to ask you about that. So technically, they still.
Oh yeah, not technically, they do. Yeah, they had. Yeah, and they redacted a few things in Blowback. I mean, I'm a professional intelligence officer, or a former one anyway, so I know what is going to, once the political stuff is aside, I mean, I'm not going to reveal anything that puts anyone in jeopardy, but they are hypersensitive about things. I'll give you an example. In Fair Game, and if the NSA is listening, I'll just have to take my lumps. But so in Fair Game,
if they're listening.
So one of the phrases they redacted in Fair Game was chief of station, which, as many of you may know, means the head guy of the CIA in any given country. That's called the chief of station. It's the CIA station. So they redacted that. And then shortly thereafter, they released a book by a former colleague of mine called, that's right, Chief of Station. So let's just say it's a little arbitrary how they determine, what is classified and not.
On your travel thing, I just want to say the attention to detail and that sense of place and the moving around is fantastic. And it's interesting to see those places through the eyes of an operative. Just the things that stand out, and you're looking at landmarks in a very different way in terms of just assessing what's happening and what could happen, which is a very different way of traveling around the world.
Yeah, it's not, when I would go to a new city for the first time, I would throw my bag down in the hotel room, and I would start doing a grid, back and forth, and I was not the typical tourist, right? I'm not looking at the cathedral no, I'm looking to see where are blind corners, where can I pick up surveillance, where would be a good meeting site, where are there people at what times, so I would say that I saw a lot of the world in a very different way than voters. Than Steve, what's his name? Steve, Rick
Pretty little guy.
or whatever.
Truly, they're talking about Lonely Planet. Yes, ma'am.
I have a couple questions. One is, was your husband also, he was also in the CIA or no?
No, the question was my husband in the CIA? Not that I'm aware of. He was a U.S. diplomat. He served most of his career in Africa, but he was also the charge d'affaires at our embassy in Baghdad during the first Gulf War.
Now, did he have to give up his job also?
He retired from the State Department in 1998. He served in the National Security Council.
My other question was, did you ever find out why they did this to you? Was it because you were a Democrat?
The question was, why did they do this? I presume you mean the leak of my name. The first answer to that is that my husband had been a very vocal critic in the run-up to the war. He'd been very public and debated the likes of Bill Kristol and others that were, all talking about it being a cakewalk, and that we'll be greeted as liberators and so forth. And Joe was saying, this might not be the best idea we've ever had. And he spoke with some authority because he had negotiated with Saddam Hussein. He had negotiated the release of hundreds of American hostages during the first Gulf War. The first President Bush had called him a true American hero. So he knew of what he was speaking, unlike many of those that were, pundits that just show up on TV. So we did go to war, of course, in March 2003. And there was, in the background, a lot of articles that began to appear in the press. Of course, we have been told that Saddam Hussein had a nuclear weapon. We don't want to see the smoking gun in the shape of a mushroom cloud. You know, I don't want to go through all that. Y'all live in Marin, you know, in the Bay Area. You all know the backstory there. But what happened was that finally he was told in June 2003 by journalists that this story about you going to a trip to Niger on behalf of the CIA, he was asked to go to see if there was any truth to this claim of yellow cake uranium from Niger to Iraq. That had proven to be true. It would be quite significant. It would indicate that Saddam Hussein was seeking to reconstitute his nuclear weapons program. And he came back and he said there was nothing to it. It was totally bogus. But so this story was sort of bubbling in the press. And Condoleezza Rice, who was then the National Security Advisor, went on Meet the Press, and she said, listen, you know, maybe some people down in the bowels of the agency knew about these reports that wasn't true, but certainly no one in my circles. And that was an erroneous statement. When Joe returned from Niger, he was fully debriefed by the CIA. Those reports went throughout the intelligence community. So after a great deal of consideration, he wrote an op-ed for the New York Times entitled "What I Did Not Find in Africa," and it debunked the central premise of the administration's rationale for going to war in Iraq. And then a week later, my name was given, leaked, and that I worked for the CIA.
Yes, you.
I wanted to just, you just talked about going to hotel rooms and kind of doing your grid, and I was actually sitting next to you yesterday evening, and I left in the car, and I was wondering, I mean, that must be a skill that probably you don't shake off. So I was sitting there driving home, wondering, like, I wonder how quickly she profiled me and just at the dinner table. So I'm wondering, is that something you can't shake, like in meeting people? Is that something that's just second nature that you still do? Do you find yourself still
I think that's
doing
clearly
that?
why she didn't sit next to you tonight.
Oh, that's not true. The question, I'll just repeat the question, was the skills that you use being in the CIA, do they easily shake off? And I would say no, but really at the heart of it is I'm very curious. Everyone in this room has a story, and I want to know it. I mean, you just have to, some people are a little more reticent, some people talk too much, but everyone has an interesting story. Most, that has been my experience. And that's what you're doing when you are out there gathering intelligence, you're talking to people. I mean, of course you're applying different things and you're thinking about targeting. I mean, sometimes it's very targeted. Sometimes so-and-so in this position of real access. They can tell me something about a nuclear procurement network that I want to know. So, you make yourself available, but it really does come down to a curiosity about people. And no, I was not profiling you at dinner. This is a whole different world of many people in this room are writers or aspiring writers. And it's fascinating for me, because this is not my normal universe, to meet people and talk to, well, why is it you want to put that story down on the page? What is it that's compelling you to do that? So it's fun.
Yes, now that you're a writer, do you have a preference from being a CIA agent to being a writer now?
The question was, do I have a preference of being a CIA agent to the writer? Like I said previously, I miss my old job. I really do. This is my life, and it's wonderful in many ways. But if none of this had happened, I'd be overseas now with my family and working on those issues, which I'm still passionate about, and I do other things. But I mean, writing is just a piece of what I do. But I miss my old job.
Yes, sir.
I wonder, I know you're not in the CIA loop anymore, but what do you think about the recent developments with ISIS, and could it have been different had people like your husband been listened to?
The question was the recent developments with ISIS. I speak as a citizen, not as, I am out of the intelligence world right now. what American doesn't feel dismay at you see, I mean, how many men and women, not to mention Iraqi lives, have been lost, and it seems for what? I have a obvious bias for this, but I think most Americans do agree with me when I think that our foray into Iraq will be seen as one of the worst foreign policy decisions this country has ever made. And you have to wonder if that, you know, that as there are many that call that the original sin, right? You know, that we can talk about what has gone forward and other decisions that were made in either the surge or anything else, the pivot from Afghanistan. There's all kinds of things. But here we are now, and it's devastating. And as we all watch with a deep sense of pain, I can't imagine those that have lost loved ones there, and here we are, you know, right? And I get really tired of hearing this straw man argument put up that by those that supported the war and continue to support the war and say, well, isn't the world better off without Saddam Hussein? You know, get in line for that if you're going to put it on those terms. The world would be better off without a lot of terrible dictators. But whether we should impose our sense of this is what democracy looks like, and that's a whole other conversation.
Richard Clark, when he retired from the esteemed Bush administration, started writing novels. Somebody asked him, why are you writing novels? His quote was, you can say so much more in a novel.
Yeah.
Do you agree?
The quote from Richard Clark was, you can say so much more in a novel. Yes, you can. Of course, I mean, I have a particular burden to bear in that I have to run everything by the CIA, my old employer. So yes, fiction is a lot easier to sell and package. But as I said, of course, the truth can be told in fiction.
I wondered if you knew Jessalyn Radak, and if so, could you compare what happened to her with what happened to you and the vindictiveness of the G to her, even after she lost her job with the Justice Department? Yeah.
No, I don't know her. I don't. I follow her on Twitter, but this is Jessalyn, Jessica. Jessica, yeah, Radak.
Building on the Twitter part, what do you read? What's your media? What's your input every day?
Are you talking nonfiction?
Well,
you know,
I'm
media,
talking
news
nonfiction.
sources?
I'm talking quasi-real
You
Yeah.
like news sources?
News sources.
Yeah.
Both my husband and I try to take in as much international media as possible because it is something to understand things not from a Washington-centric viewpoint. There's almost every major newspaper in the world has an English online edition. So I make sure I go through, I'm particularly interested in Turkey. I read I read Israeli paper, Haaretz in English, Al Jazeera, The Guardian. I mean, because particularly here in the United States, we've become so deeply polarized, as we all know, it's ever more important to expand your net as wide as possible and take in as much information, and then you filter it through, of course, your own personal biases, and so that's what we do for news. I enjoy traveling overseas because it seems the news is, and frankly, much richer. When just watching the network news here, now because the little things are a couple blips on the screen with ISIS or with Gaza, but maybe you get 6 minutes on a network news of foreign affairs that deeply impact us. You know, the oceans on either side of us don't really protect us. So I'm always looking for outside foreign sources of information.
I have a question about your memoir, and when I first got it, I was like really excited that you'd left all the redacting, and it was interesting because I bought it through Amazon, so they sent me a preview chapter on the Kindle. So I'm reading it on the Kindle, and there's this redact, you know, and I'm like, redact. And I'm like, well, maybe when I get the book, I'll be able to just read it. But no. So I totally support the idea of showing what wasn't there. at the same time, I'm finding it really irritating to try to read.
Well, that's a whole other reason not to like Amazon, I suppose. I had no idea that the e version came up that way.
It was interesting. No, but when I got the book, the same passages were edited out. They were just blacked out instead of just like a little quote. And I found it really hard to read the book because you're reading along and then there's this huge blank places. And so I'm caught between admiration for you leaving that in there and just wanting to read the damn story.
Me too.
Yeah. And I was kind of wondering if you were ever going to publish a version of it without all of that.
I don't think I'm committed.
Yeah.
We had a question here about, how many languages do you speak? Do you speak other languages?
Barely English, I feel like some days. But I speak German, Greek, and French with varying degrees of success.
German, Greek, and French. Sir.
I want to say thank you for your years of service to our country. Number one. If you were in the CIA prior to 2002,
Hypothetically.
what brought you to it, and also how would you share anything with younger females, especially? About career paths and about life and things like that.
The question was how I came to the CIA in the first place, right? Hypothetically, if I existed before 2002. What I can tell you is that I come from a family of public service was considered something noble. My father fought in World War II. He was in the South Pacific and he made a career in the Air Force. He was an officer. And my brother was wounded in Vietnam. My mother was a public school teacher. So when I got this opportunity to join the CIA, I thought it was for sure much more interesting than what my friends were doing. And I always wanted to live and work overseas. I didn't know in what capacity. I didn't grow up thinking the CIA was a viable career choice. But it was, I loved it. And, you know, like anywhere else, there's bad apples and bureaucracy and things that wear you down, but you try to thread your way through that and make it your own, you know, your successes and what is it that's meaningful to you. And the second part of the question was about talking to young women especially. So I do a lot of speaking at universities, which I love, and I'm usually approached by young people that want to know how to, you know, pursue such a career. And I always say, despite what happened to me, I am a huge advocate of public service. You know, it doesn't have to be the CIA, but there's so many ways to consider how you can contribute. So I always encourage them to at least keep it in mind. It's extremely difficult, the whole process. I've known quite a few people that would be wonderful candidates, but you don't know why they didn't get in, or they only got to a certain point. Who knows? I know that after 9/11, there was a huge influx of really, and you want to hear this, as a taxpayer, you want to hear this, really bright, patriotic young people who put aside really big paychecks to go to work for the CIA. And I got to, you know, manage and run work with these young people. And that was just so, that's what we should be doing, you know, bringing in the best and the brightest.
One of the things that came through in both Fair Game and Blowback is the passion in your case and in Vanessa's case, just for what she's doing, like that how important that is and how it is keeping us all safe. So that's palpable in both books. Yes, sir.
Sort of get off the real personal things. Do you expect, or would you like to see any movie deals with your books and maybe?
Sure, who doesn't? Yeah. No, you know, it's changed though, hasn't it? I mean, all the good stories are on TV. right? I mean, for movies, if you want to see Transformers 15, sure.
Which, by the way, was outstanding.
So my 14-year-old says so.
But you're right, the pendulum swung back to TV, and odd, who knew that was going to happen?
Right.
Yeah.
I think I do a little bit with Hollywood, but it's very clear that there's a monumental change. Actors used to sort of sniff at TV. It was only if they really needed a paycheck or needed to buy a new car or something. But now that's where the stories are. You could say it started with The Sopranos or Sex and the City, and now there's a plethora of amazing stories on TV, and the studios are left wondering, well, how come no one wants to see Transformers 15? Huh?
Go figure.
I know.
Go figure. You're only going to take 2 more questions. I apologize because we're running out of time. Yes.
Any thoughts on the work of Le Carre? Do you relate to it and his experience as an industry as opposed to ours as Americans?
Le Carre, I absolutely adore his books. He served in a different place and time, which comes across and permeates that. It was also, he was with the service really not terribly long. And I was just reading an excellent book that is coming out shortly. I read The Galleys about Kim Philby.
Oh, yeah.
And it's fascinating story of betrayal and how he brought, for those of you who don't know, he was an MI6 officer and considered to be one of what's called the Cambridge Five. He was recruited in the 30s when there were a lot of fellow travelers in the West, and he was the KGB's best agent for years, and it finally broke him. I mean, he died a broken man in many ways, but there was for many years a great mole hunt over that. So I'm just thinking of that, and all the flip side of that was James Angleton, who was with the CIA, who saw his hunt for a mole in the CIA in the 60s and 70s based on what happened with Philby, broke him, but it just about broke the agency as well. And so it's a fascinating time and stories of the Cold War and personalities and classic themes of betrayal.
Apparently there's a desire to sell books. So we're going to give time for you to get your books signed. So one last question, sir.
I've been wanting for years to ask someone with your experience and your views one simple question that no one's ever been able to explain to me, but why are we fighting the Taliban?
The question was, why are we fighting the Taliban?
Yeah.
How much time do you have?
I mean, it could be a simple there could be a short version.
I'll give you a very short answer, which is, I think this is, I supported going to war in Afghanistan right after 9/11.
Right.
The Taliban is a radical Islamic regime that is completely oppressive, and it provided, of course, safe haven for Al-Qaeda.
Back then.
But now we're negotiating with them. So what's...
Well, I mean, this has been going on for an awful long time. I mean, it's hard to believe they'd be so stupid to do the same thing again. I mean, I think that...
We'll have to have a conversation offline.
So much for a short question.
Thank you.
How's this going to work?